Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Skillwork Forum. This podcast exists to help leaders and companies looking for innovative solutions to help solve skilled labor challenges across the country. I'm Tim, and I'm joined with my partner, Brett. He's over here, or maybe he's over here, one of the two. We're from Skillwork. Today, we're going to be talking about the topic of something that maybe is not directly tied to what we do as a business, but it's really important to all of us as leaders. Either we're going to be led by somebody or we're going to be leading people on one way, shape, or form. So today we want to talk about the concept of servant leadership, specifically what this really looks like and what it requires and the intentionality it requires to lead in this way. So Brett, you and I were talking, and I just Googled servant leadership and books about servant leadership, and dozens of them popped up all over, and as well as 10 things to know how you're a servant leader, and here's steps to take to become a better servant leader. So this is a topic or concept that's very well known by a lot of people, and unfortunately, sometimes when a topic is very well known and used like that, it kind of becomes a little bit of a buzzword, and people really fail to capture the depths of what it's really getting at and what's required to be a servant leader. We've listened to a few things recently that got our hearts stirred up about this and challenged in our thinking. A guy that we like, Brett, a lot, in his books and some of his leadership approaches and the way that he goes about his business, Patrick Lencioni. And you shared a statement he made recently, and I think it really got me to thinking. You want to share that thought and what you thought about what he said?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, Pat. I think it's actually Lencioni, but everybody says Lencioni, including you and me. And so, but because it flows easier. And so, matter of fact,
what is it supposed to be? Lencioni? Is that it?
It's Lencioni.
Lencioni. Okay.
Yeah, but he laughs about it because nobody says it right. So,
well, I'm sure Patrick will be listening to this, so I'm sorry, Patrick, about that.
That's right. I'm hoping for the call, and but yeah, no, he is obviously a great, he runs a company called the Table Group, and is probably one of the premier organizational development health, leaders out there right now. Great speaker, and one of this area is very passionate to him right now. Matter of fact, he wrote a book called The Motive that's all about this. And his statement would be that as a leader, if you're trying to become a servant leader, you've already got a problem, because the only kind of leadership is servant leadership. So if you're not by nature a servant leader, there's probably a valid argument to say that maybe leadership wasn't the best path for you, and so, which is really challenging. And his point would be, and Tim, you can expand on it, is that I think he actually has a statement, or I don't know if it's his, but if anything other than servant leadership is just economics. And his point in that is really, the way I interpret that anyhow, is that if your whole mindset is I give to get, it's economics.
Right.
We talk about it, Tim, in our other side stuff that we do in marriages and whatnot. That concept of give to get, that'll wreck a marriage in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's more of a transactional relationship than a transformational. We've talked about that as well, and absolutely. I think that's right. And I would just say to those out there who feel like you can always improve your servant leadership. And so even though you may not be bent in that direction, and I think it's our natural tendency is to focus on self, that you can definitely recognize if you're tending in that direction. And Lencioni also, when talking about this, said that a lot of people, they start out in building a business, or maybe in ministry, or whatever it happens to be. A lot of times they start out with that desire they've got a passion, they've got a vision, they've got a goal, and they're burdened by that. They're motivated by that, but later, it becomes more the reward and the fun and the coolness of being a leader and running something. So somewhere along the line, they lose sight of the challenge of responsibility of leadership. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, these two sides of the coin of it's either responsibility that you're being motivated by, or it's the reward. So it's interesting. Earlier today, Brad, I just threw out a quick poll to some of the folks on our team here, and I just said, don't think about it, but what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term servant leadership? And so the responses I got back were somewhat consistent, but there were things like humility, dedicated to team success. One of our guys said that dying to self, which that really struck me as being on point. This one, avoid being a credit hound, like looking for the credit and everything, and then focusing on others. So all these things are attributes that came to the people on our team's mind, which of course you and I look at that and go, man, I hope I'm living out these values daily. So what do you think, Brett? What's your definition of servant leadership? How would somebody ask you, what does it look like to be a servant leader? What would you say?
I think it's, for me, just kind of probably a rough definition, is something, leading intentionally, with passion to make everyone and everything around you better. And so I think it's the concept of as a leader, you have to be, if you get somewhere and you look around and you're there by yourself, one, it's not going to be that as near as enjoyable as you thought it was going to be, and you will have really missed the mark. So I think, as you said, some of the folks from our team, dedicated to team success, avoid being, dying to self, all of those things point back to lifting others up, to be a true leader. It's not about you raising yourself, or I always used to tell my boys, if to make yourself feel better, you had to make somebody else feel worse, that's not a very good leader. And so, and so,
Yeah.
and then the other thing too, in that, Tim, I think we want to be at least aware or careful not to, it can start to sound a little mushy, like, oh, to be a leader, I got to be this humble, this just doormat kind of personality. It can sound very, like you're going to go on a retreat and, and fall into each other's arms kind of stuff.
Right.
And that is not what this is about. This is, I would challenge to say, in order to be a good leader, which we've already identified, to be a good leader, you have to be a servant leader. I would also say you have to continue to grow and to grow, give, repeat. And so it's not like you get to a point and then you stop challenging, you stop holding people accountable. That's not it at all.
Right.
It's just you do it with the right purpose.
Yeah, actually, in that Lencioni book, and as I heard him talk, he said that one of the attributes of a servant leader is, you're not afraid to have the difficult conversations and challenge people, and a lot of leaders shy away from that because it's difficult and it's not fun. But it's important that we do that we have some of those difficult conversations and challenge people and press in. And he said, that again, we have many examples that we can look at that, we can list them out, many that I've had in my past that I look at as leaders that were inspiring. In history, there's, Abraham Lincoln is one that comes to mind personally, Mother Teresa, who gave literally her life away for the poorest of the poor, Martin Luther King Jr., who led civil rights transformation in this country, famously said that what matters is not the color of somebody's skin, but the content of their character, which I think is a message that we could all stand to hear over and over again. But our personal favorite, Brett, as we talked, is in our mind the greatest example ever is Jesus Christ, who we follow, and we do our best to aspire to live up to what he calls us to. And he was a transformational leader on a lot of different levels. Certainly was not afraid to challenge people. He certainly was not afraid to put others first. And there's a little snippet that we looked at, and I thought I would share it here, Brett, from the Gospel of Mark. And it's interesting, and you're familiar with this passage, Brett. So the two brothers of the 12 disciples, so you kind of think about if you and I were to have our senior leadership team, they would be like VPs that are trying to figure out how to become executive VPs so they can be, get to the executive bathroom on the penthouse suite. And so they're talking amongst themselves, and they want to be the greatest, one on the left hand of Jesus and one on the other, and Jesus is overhearing their conversation. So he challenges them after they've walked all day long, and they come to a place where they're resting that night. And in Mark chapter 10, he says this to them. So Jesus called them together and said, that rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, looking at his leadership team, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So I thought, Brett, what are your thoughts on that, and how can we take some application from that?
Yeah, I mean, Tim, in our, in the things that guide us, both personally and at the core, value of our business, we find no better example in history of most things, but being a servant leader, Christ's example in that is just beyond. I mean, if you really want to see what radical leadership looks like, if you really want to look at the history and look at somebody willing to speak up for people who had no voice and reach a hand and help those who needed help. I mean, there is no better example that ever walked this earth. And so,
yeah, and I think what you said there is right on point. That the example, he not just said the words, which are great, but he actually followed through. So saying does not equal doing, and there's a lot of people that are saying a lot of things right now. And a lot of people are pontificating all over social media and all over a lot of different places. And I'm not saying what they're saying is not bad, but my question is, what are they doing, and what are we doing? And I think servant leaders, getting back to that concept, it's easy to say that you're a servant leader. It's easy to say that you embrace those things, but by demonstrating it and doing it, and Jesus did that most famously on the last night of his life, when he knew what was heading his way, extreme pain and anguish and separation from his Father. He demonstrated by washing the disciples' feet, the lowest of the low act of servanthood. So he left that with them. So it's about following through and doing rather than just saying. So it's really important too, Brett, what you said earlier about servant leadership doesn't mean avoiding confrontation. It doesn't mean a fear of making unpopular decisions or inconsistency or lacking conviction. We're not talking about that at all, right?
No, we're not talking about being, being a meek or a soft leader. We're just talking about leading with passion, and to do that, you have to be willing just to continue to grow, and you can't ever really kind of stop that process. I think, kind of piggybacking on what you said there, Tim, to kind of put it in full context of servant leader, I think you're 100% right. It fits a lot of what we have going on in the world right now. But it's this idea of intentionality. You can gain a lot of knowledge. You can read a lot of books. You can listen to a lot of podcasts, and or you can get your information wherever, social media. But there's not a lot of value in it if you don't do something with it, which is the intentionality. So if you and I know that these are the things that we're called to in servant leadership, but we don't really take any action on that, it doesn't do much. I think it's probably the biggest thing that I find interesting in these times that we're in right now is the to be able to have a civil conversation about some of these things that we all really need to be able to work on, look in the mirror but will we have the staying power? Will we actually do something intentionally to make it better? We talk about, it's an Andy Stanley term, but we may not change the world, but we might change somebody's world, and that all of those things just require you to be intentional, to take these things that we're talking about and actually continue the conversation and then take some action. So
Yeah, it's caring enough to actually do those things. And Lencioni doesn't shy away from the fact that Jesus was motivated by love, and he says there's nothing wrong with us as leaders, having the same motivation for our people on our team, our employees, and having that deep care and concern for them and putting them first. And there's I don't know how famous it is, but a quote I say all the time: it's that a rising tide lifts all ships. And if you think about ships in a port, the tide comes in, the tide is equal and all ships get lifted. And we always say around here that as we improve ourselves individually, and we're looking corporately across, lifting everybody up. It's not, I only get lifted up if you get lifted down. It's, we're looking for opportunities to lift up the whole, lift up the team. And sometimes that means being challenged. Sometimes that means confronting. Sometimes it means encouraging, a combination of those things, but it's all motivated because we have a genuine concern and, in fact, love for the people that work for our organization. And sometimes we may not like them, but that's okay. That's what love's all about. It's doing the right thing despite that. So I think we talked about what servant leadership is, some of the traits, humility and care and concern, and putting others first and those sort of things. But what about the opposite side of that, Brad? And you and I have been in the workforce long enough to maybe recognize some of these traits in ourselves at times, but certainly we've worked for people that have the opposite of servant leadership, which is either power or self-based leadership, focused on self. And what are some, when I put that term out there, you probably have somebody come to mind that you think about, Brett, that that guy was that way or that gal was that way. What is it about them that you would, encapsulate? How are they motivated by what they do?
yeah, well, as in most a lot of the things that stumble us along our path, whether it be in our profession or in our relationships or many things, is pride. And so I think we've all experienced being part of or being around somebody who's a very prideful leader, and it usually comes across as, you hear things like, because I'm the boss, or things like, if you ever find yourself saying, because I'm the boss, that might be good.
That might be a good indicator.
so that's not, you could happen out of frustration or something like that. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with getting upset or having a bad day. We're not preaching to people with the idea that we got this all figured out.
No, not at all. No.
And so, it's a daily process. But yeah, Tim, I mean, like you said, the people where their egos, I've had people that I've worked, with or for in the past where a lot of times it's, people who they're just not, they're not there. They're not, unless they need something from you, they really aren't engaged. They're just kind of aloof.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that, you get the sense that you're only valuable as long as you're getting something that they need that will help them personally. And, I come from a Navy background as a naval officer, and people mostly think of the military and they think, well, there's no servant leadership there. It's very autocratic. You say jump and people say how high. And while it's true, you have to have some very direct, obedience-based leadership, depending on the scenario. It's very much a culture where I came from where it was very much servant leadership. The leaders were always out front doing the things first, taking on things that they expected their folks to do. So I learned that early on. But I also had my share of guys that were power hungry. And I looked up power, just a definition of that. And it, the definition is power is a possession of control, authority, or influence over others. And I think when you talk about people that are motivated to be leaders based on that they're looking for the personal reward of being control, being an authority, or being, hey, it's cool to be the boss. I think those sort of leaders really usually end up either having a short-lived success at an organization, or they end up having a lot of turnover in their organization, and they really don't get the most out of their people, because what you end up doing is you end up having a whole lot of people that become little models of who you are. So you have a bunch of people that instead of focused for the team, they're focused for self. And it's hard to get an organization moving forward that way.
Yeah, no doubt. I had a good friend of mine. Matter of fact, I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night. We try to get together, we used to get together once a month, but lately that got pushed back a little bit, but hopefully that's kind of returning. But probably, if not the smartest guy, he worked, I would say for me, but he really worked with me. I always say anything good I ever did in my past business, he created, and and I got to take the glory of most of it. But he was one of those guys. He was just super smart, and he would always come with these little witty sayings that would make you stop and think. And he always used to have a saying about certain leaders or people, and he'd say, John never fails, but often the people around him do. And so, that kind of leader is the one that's
man, do I know that type? Oh man, yeah. So, and when things go right, boy, it's because of their brilliance and
absolutely, yeah. Oh yeah, no, they're always there for the glory, and somehow it's somebody else's fault when it doesn't go right. But so he always had his witty way of summing simple things or complicated things to a simple way. So
was he the guy that also said just do the right thing, or was that another?
No, that's a different guy. Yeah, that was a guy. I love that one too. For years.
Boils everything down. Just if you need to make a decision, just do the right thing. So
of
course, then you got to know where you're getting your right from, your North Star bearing, as we call it here. So, it's this idea of that we've been inspired by to talk about this, that leadership is motivated by one of two things: either the reward that you perceive you're getting from it, or because you're motivated by the responsibility that comes from leadership. The burden, not the burden of leadership, but the burden for people that you're leading. And if you ask yourself, what do I get my greatest joy from? Personal success, or the success of my business, or the success of the people that work for me? And that should give you kind of a clue as to what side of the spectrum you might be on. And that what we quoted earlier from Mark chapter 10, we're at that Jesus talking about the people, kind of, he said the Gentiles, but really what he's getting at there are those that aren't followers of me, those that are following the way of the world. They lord it over them. So in other words, they want to be the boss. They want to be in charge. They lord their authority over people. So power-driven people want to be in charge. They want authority to make decisions, and they're motivated by that. So it's not a very productive way to run a business in the long run.
For sure.
So we thought we'd maybe leave you with from a Forbes article, and we'll get the link, and it'll go out when we put the podcast out. But give credit where credit is due. This is not original thought. It's from a Forbes article, but in the article, it had 4 signs you may fall into this category of being a power or self-based leadership, and maybe we can just go over those here, Brett, on our way out. And I think the first one there is, if you find yourself as a leader frequently talking about I, me, or my, rather than we, us, and you might fall into that category.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that one?
No, yeah, for sure. Yes, for sure. So yeah, I think the second one was, you don't want to hear bad news, which is interesting, but it's true, and if, when you kind of have that power, you don't really want to believe the bad news. You don't want to, you kind of deny it, suppress it, till it eventually catches up with you. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you hear a lot that everything is always sunshine and roses for power hungry leader, because there are people who learn not to give them bad news. So,
yeah. That's right.
So the third one is you tend to be frustrated when you're not in charge, when you're not the man. So and again, I have pictures in my mind of leaders I'm thinking of that they're just unable to give away anything. They're unable to give away and delegate, and or even talking. They've always got to have the last say. They've always got to have a point. It doesn't mean, again, that you're silent, you don't add input, but if you are frustrated and it actually makes you angry when you're not in charge, then you may be driven by
power. Yeah, no, for sure. So then I know that last one, that you distrust your coworkers and employees, kind of back to Pat Lencioni, he talks a lot about, if you read, he got, I don't know, 11 or 12 books, one is Death by Meeting. And in that book, he talks about true healthy confrontation, but he would also tell you it's all built on trust. And so if you don't have trust on a team, you have no chance of having honest dialogue that will allow the organization to move forward. And so, when you have, distrust, coworkers, employees, you're not going to, there won't be any bad news talked about. There won't be much accomplished, and it will be death by meeting, because you'll sit in a lot of meetings and one person will talk.
I'm just looking over here over my shoulder, and maybe I do have it there. So it's a Stephen Covey book, The Speed of Trust. You said that, it made me think about that book, is that your organization can only move to the extent that people trust each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to move out, if you want to grow, then you better have trust. And if you don't, if people don't trust each other, and you, especially as a leader, don't trust your people, you might start looking in the mirror. So as to why that's so. So some great things to think about. And again, we don't have this wired. We are people like you. That means we're flawed. We're selfish by nature. We tend to lean towards self. All of us like to, be the center of attention. We all like affirmation. God created us that way. There's nothing wrong with that, but it shouldn't be our primary focus. So to summarize and finish things out here, servant leadership, what we're called to be. If you believe the statement that the only real leaders are servant leaders, that means you focus on others, the good of team over self. that you don't have to be the center of attention, that you build a community and a culture of trust. On the other hand, if you're a power-based or self-based leader, your focus is obviously on yourself and your authority and your personal advancement. So, Brett, any other final thoughts on those before we wrap up today?
No, it's just I don't even know who, I don't even know where I ever picked it up, but or who said it, but it just kind of leaves me thinking about, they're saying that most people don't want to do the work that it takes to change the world, but they want the credit for changing the world. Our challenge, I think, to everybody, including ourselves, would be to flip that and to really have the passion to be transformational, to change the world or someone's world or your team's world, and don't get focused on who's going to get the credit. And I think you'll have a great experience.
Yeah, I can't remember the coach. I think it was the old UCLA coach, John Wooden, that said it's amazing what a team can achieve if nobody cares who gets the credit.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's so true. Well, hopefully this gave you some things to think about, both on a personal and professional level. We want to thank you for joining us today on the Skillwork Forum. Again, just a reminder, our company exists to provide the best skilled craftsmen, skilled workers to manufacturing, construction, and transportation, specialty services across the country. So if we can help you out in that regard as you're getting your company back up and rolling, we'd love to reach out to you and see if we can help you grow your business. And for more information, you can reach us at our website. Just go to www.skillwork.com and you can find us there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.